In the desolate heart of Western Australia, 1932, a conflict unfolded that defies belief, a shadow etched into the annals of a nation's history where an entire army would face an adversary unlike any other, and ultimately, lose. This is the story of the Great Emu War, a confrontation so bizarre, so utterly catastrophic for the human combatants, that it whispers an unsettling truth about humanity's hubris against the ancient, untamed forces of nature. The year is 1932. The world outside Australia grapples with the suffocating grip of the Great Depression. But here, on the parched plains of the outback, another kind of crisis was unfolding, a slow-motion biological invasion that threatened to shatter the fragile livelihoods of struggling farmers. Wheat had been planted. Crops had matured. And with them, an ancient migratory instinct had been awakened in thousands upon thousands of flightless, formidable birds, the emus. These were not scattered flocks, this was an exodus, a tide of feathers and muscle descending upon the fertile strips of land that represented the farmer's last hope. Imagine the scene: vast, open fields, painstakingly tilled and sown, suddenly overrun by an estimated 20,000 emus. These creatures, some standing over 6 feet tall, with powerful legs capable of reaching speeds of 50 kilometers per hour, became a living, breathing plague. They tore through fences, trampling crops, devouring grain, and leaving behind a trail of ruin that pushed already desperate families to the brink of starvation. For the settlers, many of whom were ex-servicemen encouraged to farm these lands by the government, this was more than an agricultural disaster, it was an existential threat. They had survived the trenches of Europe only to be besieged by birds in their own backyard. Whispers of a curse began to circulate among the more superstitious. How else could one explain such an overwhelming, relentless assault by mere animals? The farmers appealed to the government, demanding intervention, a solution to this feathered onslaught. Their cries reached the ears of Sir George Pearce, the Minister of Defence, himself a Western Australian representative. Perhaps out of genuine concern, or perhaps seeing a politically expedient opportunity to support his constituents and provide a morale boost, Pearce made an extraordinary decision. He would deploy the military. Thus began the planning for what would become known, ironically, as the Great Emu War. The chosen weaponry was clear: Lewis automatic machine guns, rapid-fire instruments of destruction designed for human warfare. The officer in charge was Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, a man accustomed to leading soldiers against conventional enemies. He was given a small detachment, 2 men with 2 machine guns, and orders to assist the farmers. The mission seemed straightforward enough: eradicate the pests, restore order, and demonstrate the Commonwealth's commitment to its citizens. What could possibly go wrong? How could an army, armed with such devastating firepower, possibly lose to birds? The expeditionary force arrived in Campion district of Western Australia in early November 1932. The landscape itself was an indifferent, ancient witness, a vast canvas of red earth, sparse scrub, and an endless, shimmering horizon. The air hung thick with expectation, the heavy scent of eucalyptus, and the unspoken weight of the farmer's desperate hope. Major Meredith, perhaps with a touch of professional pride, was accompanied by a cinematographer, ready to document what he presumed would be a swift, decisive victory, a propaganda film showcasing the efficiency of the Australian military. But the silent, watchful land held its own secrets, and its indigenous inhabitants possessed a wisdom far older than any human tactical manual. From the very first encounter, the mystery of the emu's resilience began to unravel. The plan was simple: herd the birds into kill zones, unleash machine gun fire, and decimate their numbers. But the emus, far from being docile, easily frightened prey, displayed an uncanny awareness. They moved with an almost phantom-like grace, their dark forms blurring across the landscape. The initial attempts to drive them proved futile. These were not sheep. They scattered, they broke formation, they seemed to anticipate the soldiers' every move. On November 2nd, the first major engagement occurred. A flock of approximately 50 emus was spotted. Major Meredith ordered an ambush. The Lewis guns opened fire, spitting bullets across the plains. But the results were shockingly meager. The emus, rather than panicking and running in a straight line, dispersed with astonishing speed, zigzagging across the terrain. Their dense feathers and tough hides proved remarkably resistant to all but direct, well-placed shots. A mere handful of birds fell. The soldiers, veterans of more predictable conflicts, were taken aback. This was not the orderly, vulnerable enemy they had envisioned. The following days brought only mounting frustration. The sheer vastness of the land worked against the soldiers. Emus seemed to emerge from nowhere, graze with infuriating nonchalance, and then vanish into the shimmering heat haze. The Lewis guns, powerful as they were, had limited ammunition. Each burst needed to count, but the birds refused to cooperate. One day, the major attempted to mount a machine gun on a truck, hoping to pursue the birds. But the terrain was too rough, the vehicle too slow, and the emus too agile. The rough ride made aiming impossible, and the birds simply outran or outmaneuvered the lumbering vehicle. This wasn't just a failure of equipment, it was a profound miscalculation of the adversary. The emus, despite their seemingly primitive nature, demonstrated a complex social feeding behavior that baffled the military. As later documented in observations of birds like those detailed in studies of avian social structures from the mid-20th century, even those conducted as late as 1954, their flocking patterns were not rigid formations. They were fluid, decentralized, with individuals constantly shifting, making them an incredibly difficult target for concentrated fire. When one bird fell, the others didn't continue on a predetermined path, they scattered, reforming elsewhere with bewildering speed. The very social dynamics that allowed them to thrive in harsh environments now became their most potent defense. Major Meredith, in his reports, described them as exhibiting guerrilla tactics. An army was being outsmarted by birds. This was unheard of. The soldiers, accustomed to strategic thinking and disciplined formations, found themselves utterly helpless against an enemy that defied all known military doctrine. The birds simply refused to stand still and be shot. The ammunition dwindled rapidly, but the emu population seemed endless. Within the first week, over 2,500 rounds had been fired, yet the reported kill count was a mere 300 birds, perhaps even fewer. The official numbers would fluctuate, obscured by the dust and the sheer futility of the undertaking. This disproportionate ratio of bullets to birds was not merely inefficient, it was humiliating. The news of the unfolding fiasco began to filter back to the cities, carried by increasingly incredulous newspaper reports. Public opinion, initially supportive, began to shift. How could Australia's valiant soldiers be struggling against birds? The image of an army lost to such an enemy was ripe for ridicule. Politicians, facing increasing pressure, called for a reassessment. Despite the growing criticism, the operation was not immediately called off. Perhaps there was a sense of national pride at stake, a refusal to admit defeat. After a brief pause, Major Meredith and his men were ordered to resume their efforts. This second offensive was born not of renewed hope, but of grim determination. They pushed further into the affected areas, trying new tactics, setting up ambushes near waterholes, attempting to corner the birds. But the results remained consistently disappointing. The emus continued to prove elusive, their numbers seemingly undiminished, their movements unpredictable. The soldiers, initially optimistic, became increasingly demoralized. Imagine the psychological toll, days spent under the relentless Australian sun, chasing an enemy that seemed to mock their every effort, firing countless rounds with little to show for it. The frustration must have been immense, bordering on despair. They were trained for combat, for facing a visible, strategic enemy, not for a Sisyphean struggle against a force of nature. Major Meredith, a man of military discipline, maintained a professional front in his official dispatches, but one can only imagine the growing sense of futility that must have gripped him and his men. The mystery deepened with every failed ambush, every jammed machine gun, every missed shot. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a profound confrontation with the limits of human control. By early December, the public outcry became too loud to ignore. International newspapers picked up the story, casting Australia in an unflattering, almost farcical light. The spectacle of a modern army failing so spectacularly against such an adversary was simply too compelling to resist. Sir George Pearce, the very minister who authorized the operation, was forced to withdraw the troops. The Great Emu War officially concluded. The official kill count remains contentious, debated to this day. Major Meredith claimed around 986 emus killed with 9,860 rounds of ammunition, a ratio of exactly 10 bullets per bird. Other, less official estimates placed the number far lower, some suggesting only a few hundred. What was undeniable was the scale of the failure. An entire military operation, costing valuable resources and reputation, had achieved almost nothing. The farmers' problems persisted, and the emus continued their reign over the ravaged wheat fields. So, what truly happened? Why did a trained army, equipped with powerful weaponry, lose to birds? The answer is complex, a tapestry woven from environmental factors, logistical shortcomings, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the adversary. Firstly, the environment itself was a powerful ally to the emus. The vast, open plains of Western Australia offered endless space for the birds to maneuver and disappear. The scrubland provided cover. The intense heat wore down the human combatants and their machinery. This was not a contained battlefield, it was an untamed wilderness where the rules of conventional warfare simply did not apply. Secondly, the emus themselves were formidable. Their speed, agility, and surprising resilience were underestimated. Their erratic, unpredictable movements made them incredibly difficult targets for fixed machine guns, which are designed for suppressive fire against massed, less mobile human targets. The very nature of their flightless existence, their powerful legs built for endurance, made them perfectly adapted to evade their pursuers. Thirdly, logistics and tactics were a significant hurdle. Machine guns, while deadly, consumed vast amounts of ammunition. The cost of bullets versus the value of a few emus quickly became uneconomical. The attempts to mount guns on vehicles proved impractical due to the rough terrain. The military, accustomed to strategic objectives and command structures, was ill-equipped to handle a decentralized, instinct-driven enemy that refused to engage in a conventional fight. It was like trying to catch mist with a net. But beyond these practical considerations, there lies a deeper, more unsettling truth, one that hints at the mystery of human interaction with the wild. The Emu War, in its essence, was a clash between human ambition and nature's indifference. The farmers, and by extension the government, believed they could impose their will on the land, bending it to their agricultural designs. They viewed the emus as pests, an inconvenience to be eradicated. This worldview, a common thread throughout colonial history, often underestimated the inherent power and resilience of the natural world. Even historical records, such as those found in books digitized by institutions like Harvard University and available through platforms like the Internet Archive, including works from as early as 1822, reveal a persistent human tendency to categorize and control nature. These early accounts often depict the exotic flora and fauna of Australia through a lens of scientific curiosity or resource exploitation, rarely with a profound understanding of the complex ecological balance at play. The emu, a creature present for millennia, was suddenly deemed an enemy because its ancient migratory paths intersected with human-drawn property lines. This clash of ancient instinct and modern agriculture set the stage for an inevitable, almost archetypal conflict. The Great Emu War, though often recounted with a touch of dark humor, is more than just a funny anecdote. It is a potent reminder of human arrogance, of the illusion of control we often harbor over the natural world. It underscores how our most sophisticated tools and tactics can be rendered useless against an adversary that simply operates by different rules, that is perfectly attuned to its environment. Some might even suggest a more ominous interpretation, a form of karmic retribution. The relentless push to tame the wilderness, to carve out agricultural empires from ancient landscapes, sometimes provokes a backlash from the very forces being subdued. Was the Emu War merely a logistical failure, or was it the land itself, through its creatures, pushing back against the encroaching human footprint? Was it a subtle curse, a whispered warning from the vast, ancient Australian continent? The legacy of the Emu War is not one of victory, but of enduring questions. It became a cautionary tale, a moment of national embarrassment that nevertheless forged a unique place in Australia's folklore. It demonstrated that even an army, equipped with the latest technology, could be overwhelmed and outmaneuvered by the most unexpected of adversaries. The image of those soldiers, frustrated and defeated on the dusty plains, stands as a stark monument to the unpredictable power of the wild. The lesson endures: humanity, for all its ingenuity, remains but one species on a planet teeming with ancient, resilient life. And sometimes, the most profound mystery is not a hidden treasure or an unsolved crime, but the unsettling truth that we are not always the dominant force we believe ourselves to be. What other battles, unseen and unacknowledged, are being waged right now, where the forces of the natural world are slowly, inexorably, claiming their own quiet, unsettling victories? And what dark consequences await those who refuse to heed nature's silent, formidable warnings? The emus of Western Australia certainly taught their lesson.